Well, my name's Henry Eggleston. I joined in 1959 straight from school as in those days, what was called a scientific assistant. I knew of the place because I lived within the sort of bus routes, right on the edge of it, and also within sound of some of the testing when the wind was in the right direction. But I'd also seen a television programme in the middle 1950s when they did some test firings live from one of the, or a couple of the sites here. I think they fired a liquid propellant engine and a solid. And I saw that and I thought, that would be interesting to work there. And sort of had an engineering sort of interest and ended up too old for an apprenticeship and went into the scientific side. And sort of stooged around in that for all my time.
So what did you actually do? What was your job here?
Well, I came helping on a test site that was doing what they generally called combustion studies. We were running a little research engine using hydrogen peroxide, HTP, and heptane. Heptane being roughly the average of kerosene and obtainable in a very pure form. It's used in petrol testing. It's the zero of octane rating. Apparently, they do a mix of octane and heptane, and you get your research octane number, as I understand it, by the proportion of octane in the mix, which gives you comparable detonation results to the petrol you want to compare it with. I hope that makes sense to you.
And what did those tests actually involve?
Lots of test firings, different injector elements, different chamber lengths, taking samples of gases from combustion chamber and exhaust, traversing the gas sampling probe across both chamber and exhaust. It's a long while ago though, 45 years ago I moved on from there. But it was interesting and busy, and I'm sure I learned a lot.
Were those tests specifically for any particular engine?
No.
They were.
No, it was general research. I was only the helper, the assistant, doing the donkey work, but it was quite a good education, I think.
Were there any particular incidents that spring to mind from testing?
I think we had a fairly peaceful time on that one. We also ran a window chamber, same propellants, with a rectangular cross-sectional chamber, really just a thin slice vertically through a chamber, with a glass and perspex window in the side of it, and this could be filmed. You could only run it for a second. The system got too hot and you were likely to melt perspex, crack glass, quartz panels, whatever. But with a high-speed camera, or I think it's correctly these days called a medium-speed camera, running at several thousand frames a second, you could see how baffling the process really was.
What about the people you were working with here?
Well, at that time, the boss of this sort of little group was Dr. Dudley Lewis, who I believe still lives in the district, but he went on to much greater things eventually.
And what about the other individuals in
Well,
how was this? How was it actually organised here? Because in terms of personnel, I mean, presumably there were sort of little individual groups within Westcott who.
yeah, there was. Well, I suppose there was a director at the top. There was a liquid propellants division, a solid division, a what they called materials division, which is what I was in at that time, and then there was the engineering division, I suppose it was, doing the manufacturing, supplying people to work on the test site workshops on the liquids and materials divisions. Then there was, of course, an admin group and probably one or two others I can't remember.
Yeah. And how did the sort of liquid and solid groups sort of worked with each other? I mean, was there any, I'm sort of interested in, whether or not there was any not conflict, but,
friendly rivals.
Yes, that's the
yeah.
expression.
There was a bit of leg pulling went on, but I think in general it was a very, very friendly place to work. There wasn't anything more than leg pulling. At the time, I wasn't aware of anything, but of course we didn't necessarily meet a lot. It was scattered over near enough a site about a mile square. So many people you hardly ever met. Certainly at my level, those higher up would have met in the senior mess and at various meetings and such like, I'm sure.
Well, one of the things actually I haven't spoken to anybody much about is the security side of things, working under the Official Secrets Act here and, how that sort of, whether or not you could ever talk about what you were doing when you went home at night and, what sort of discussions actually went on within the place itself.
Initially I wasn't really troubled with it, but you still didn't talk. It was all very we had this climate of secrecy sort of emphasised when you came here. That don't tell anyone anything. You could certainly no details were sort of spoken about.
And what about actually on the site itself? I mean,
it was I would have thought it was fairly relaxed, unless it was something very highly classified that was going on. But I think we all had a rough idea of what everyone else was, or what many others were doing, but not necessarily in any detail. And if there was something seriously classified, then it was kept very very much under control.
Was all the work that you did on site here? Or did you do much work off site?
Oh, I had 1 or 2 trips out, but not much.
Where were they to?
Went to Foulness Island once for a little brief time. Can't remember any other trips. The odd visit, but that's all.
But you did. I mean, you didn't sort of get involved in going to Australia or anything for testing.
No, I didn't.
No,
I didn't.
Mm.
Some
I mean, are there any sort of incidents that took place here that stick in your mind?
Oh, there was the odd blow up. Come to think of it, the first day I got here, they managed to blow up a LOX kerosene engine. There was a large plume of black smoke rose over a site, a mushroom of black smoke. That was a good start. Yeah, there were a few things went bang, or burst, or. Fortunately, there was very little damage to people while I was there. 1 or 2 people got injured, but they had injuries before then. In fact, they'd had a few deaths, I believe, like if you go back far enough. There was a report, I think there was a serious blow up, we'll call it, in the late 1940s with a liquid propellant rocket engine, which made a god-awful mess of the test site. I don't know whether you've seen a DVD or photographs that are about. You haven't? No. There's a very badly wrecked test site, and with a number of injuries, number of deaths, let alone injuries.
How much? You mentioned the hydrogen work there. Can you talk into any detail?
I can't give you any detail on the hydrogen work. I know there was some done in the 1960s, but I wasn't involved. I didn't know an awful lot about it. I sort of know who did it and where it was done, but I remember seeing the odd component that was being manufactured. So, they were manufacturing or somebody was manufacturing a thrust chamber. Constructed, I think, rather like the Rolls-Royce RZ2 with a bundle of tubes. Sort of lengthwise and joined together by, I don't know whether it was vacuum brazing or some sort of brazing and overwrapped with steel or possibly glass. I remember these tubes were very elegantly shaped, even when they were straight, before they were formed into the shape of the thrust chamber with a convergent divergent nozzle. They had a convergent divergent section on them as straight tubes even. It was a pretty clever piece of manufacturing, I think, somewhere. But I can't tell you much about it.
There must have been, I mean, quite a lot of sort of really innovative work went on here during that period.
Yes, I'm sure there was. It was, yeah, we were trying to push forward the boundaries a bit and doing various work that stretched the capabilities of science and engineering.
I don't know whether there's anything else that you can think that we ought to talk about.
I know at the time the the waxwing solid motor was considered very much a tour de force of engineering manufacture. Don't know whether you know much about it, but it was the top stage of the Black Arrow, I think I'm right, yes, the Black Arrow satellite launcher. That was it Prospero it launched. Well, that was a near spherical thrust chamber with a very, very thin wall, spun from some Marangian steel, I believe. And I know it was very much a very advanced piece of solid propellant motor tube technology. Very, very lightweight in terms of its size, I think.
I'll just stop for a second.
All right.
You want a second? I'll run up.
Go on then.
Yep.
Yeah, well, following the work on the HTP heptane engine, I moved on to a test site running the Rolls-Royce RZ2 engine, where I think I'm correct in saying we did some of the experimental work for Rolls-Royce. They were busy producing engines at that stage. It would have been for Europa launcher production testing and so forth. And we ran a certain amount of tests for our own interest, doing a little bit of, again, gas sampling work, and also we ran sort of, I think where Rolls-Royce had an experimental piece of equipment, it was easier or quicker for them to come to us to run it than to fit it in their own production testing schedule. So we ran a fuel igniter shut-off valve for them, which was interconnected with, must have been one of the main engine valves, I think the liquid oxygen valve. And also we ran tests on other ignition systems. The original ignition system was a pyrotechnic, so something like 30 grams of solid propellant of some form. I don't know the details.
Sorry, can I just stop you for a second?
And it's supposed to have started from that, but it's gone off, thank God.
Right, okay, we're going again.
All right, yeah, the test, yes, we covered the fuel igniter shut-off valve, the interconnected one. It's a long while ago, I can't really remember many details. The ignition systems that we tried here were an electric one, which was a variation on the ignition starter for a turbojet engine. It was a sort of surface discharge plug, I think, with a shower of sparks across it, fitted in. It was a lash-up, I think. We screwed it in the back of the injector, I believe. But these tests only required us to run into the ignition startup fuel, not the full fuel flow. So we just had the normal feed of liquid oxygen, and we'd never opened the main fuel valve. just used this igniter fuel valve. And we also ran the pyrophoric. Now, have I got that right? Yes, pyrophoric fuels. They were a mix of, or that we used was a mix of triethyl aluminium and triethyl boron. I can't tell you what the ratio was. It was 85% of one and 15 of the other, but I can't remember which order. I'd have to look at something. This also worked very well, but I don't know whether it ever went into use on the Europa launchers. It was a capsule of the fuel which would ignite in contact with air or liquid oxygen, go crackle, pop in contact with water, one of them would. So they had to be, the capsule had to be filled in a glove box under a nitrogen atmosphere, and it had a burster disc at each end. So when the pressure from the igniter fuel came on, it burst the first disc, drove a slug of the fuel ahead of it, burst the next one and went through into the thrust chamber, starting the fire. And it was worked very well and reliably. It was also used on another smaller engine, which was about a twelfth the size of the RZ ones. We did have an overrun once on an RZ and got, I think we got 140,000 pounds of thrust out of it by accident. It was normally 137, the version we had. I think Rolls-Royce got them up to 150. I don't know, but I'm not sure of that. And I know there was a plan to take them to 160. But we carried out that work. In fact, that work was done around the time of the famous 1963 winter, because the firing officer on there, who was one of the Germans who had joined us after the war, persuaded the safety officer that we didn't really need water, we were only doing these little ignition tests, and we were allowed to carry on with them. But I'm afraid we did a bit of damage to a thrust chamber. We got nothing in because the main fuel valve never opened, we got no liquid in the cooling tubes of the thrust chamber. And after a test, one of the early tests on the closed circuit TV, I remember the thrust chamber seemed to be in a different position. The skirt had gone sort of Z-shaped, and the end of it had moved up. So, sort of, oh dear, what shall we do? I was sort of I was well in the background. They chopped the bent bit off and carried on, because we didn't need the skirt, you see. But sort of, I suppose, red faces a bit. But the liquid in the cooling tubes gave that thrust chamber sufficient sort of strength and rigidity to maintain its shape. Without it, it could collapse in that way.
Amazing.
Yes, it was quite interesting. That that winter was horrendous here because we had no equipment. After it, the MT got equipped with snow ploughs and all the gear you could imagine. But anyway, they were well equipped to cope with snow after that. But there were vehicles getting stuck out on the runway, and we could hardly move around it. The first day I managed to get in, I think we had a mile walk, sort of from one end of the place to the other, across country, because the vehicles couldn't get to the office, out to the site. It was pretty grim.
Yeah, my father had a farm at Winslow.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
We used to hear Redfields. Just outside
Oh, Redfields,
Winslow.
I know. Yeah, I know.
We used to hear the testing going on.
I was born in sight of Winslow at Claydon.
Oh right.
Right. No, I've only moved on to Nash.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, you're at Nash, are you?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
right.
still live.
Yeah,
Lived there since I was 5.
Yeah, I'm at Great Hallwood.
Oh, you're at Great Hallwood?
Yeah, I live at Great Hallwood.
Oh, good God.
Yeah. No, my dad had the farm there, and God, it was horrendous. We just went weeks and weeks, and we couldn't.
Yeah, well,
camera on. Yep.
Sort of I suppose it's in the late 1960s we started doing some work with. Well, in the middle 1960s we started some work with packageable propellants using nitric acid and a mixed amine fuel, so-called. I think they were derived from, or they followed on from some American work. Anyway, just to prove we could do it, we ended up making a few flight test vehicles which were launched from Aberporth, and they used they were just a small vehicle with no very much a research item. There wasn't a lot of attention given to the overall weight of them, but it was a research and development program to investigate these kind of propellant combinations and sort of learn a bit about how to handle them, how to produce them. So we had these flight test vehicles had used sort of piston expulsion of the propellants, driven by, experimentally we tried, I think we probably tried nitrogen. We certainly tried a liquid monopropellant, which was a bit tricky, and cordite, a slow-burning cordite, which was the one we flew the test vehicles with. But we sort of produced 2 or 3 of each of a design, fly one, and then come along and try and improve design with different propellant valves, poppet valves. We tried a pair of coupled butterfly valves as the main propellant valve. They're lighter in weight, take up less space than a poppet valve. And we were able to demonstrate some in-flight thrust variations. We had a boost phase and a sustain phase, and we were able to show that they could be switched off, restarted, and go through another sustain and boost phase. They didn't fly very far, but they did fly when weather permitted. I went down there for 2 weeks and never saw one launched. The weather was against us, but it was January, I think. But fact, I think it took many weeks to get the weather over this winter, to get the weather suitable, because the requirements of visibility, wind were quite restrictive, because it was an experimental vehicle. But that was quite a successful program, and went on into the 1970s.
Stop for a second, actually.
Yeah, I'll go through again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I joined after the heyday of it. It was from the stories I heard, the place was really buzzing in the 1940s and 50s, where I suppose they hadn't really come down to hadn't slowed down from the type of effort that was made during the Second World War. But it was busy until, I suppose, 1980s or so, when it started to go downhill, I'm afraid. Mind you, when I joined, the driver who used to pick us up in Winslow said, "Don't know why you're joining this place, boy. It's going to close." He was right, but he was a little bit out in the date. In fact, it hasn't properly closed, but it's very nearly.
Okay.
Well, no, I think sometime in the 1980s there was some work started on liquid propellant engines for aimed at satellite apogee engines. There's a fair amount of development work of one sort and another went on with using the usual satellite propellants of dinitrogen tetroxide, or its variant called MON3, with in that case it contains 3% of NO, I think, dissolved in dinitrogen tetroxide, and either monomethyl hydrazine as the fuel, or straight anhydrous hydrazine. Both combinations were tried, and engines were developed for both of them. The most successful one was the MON3 hydrazine engine, and a number of them were sold, and they were being flown from about 15 years ago. In the early 90s, we were flying them on commercial communication satellites, and since then some have been flown on NASA experimental satellites. There's at least one going around Mars, I believe. I think there's one sat on an asteroid called Eros in the NEAR satellite, near Earth asteroid rendezvous. That was one of our apogee engines. Who knows where it is now, but somewhere in orbit, close or sat on this big asteroid. And I think all the production went to the States. It's not a vast numbers, but there's a significant number out there. I think the first flight with two engines on the Astra B satellite, which was launched in about 1992. it's been replaced, I think, with a satellite made by Astrium at Stevenage in about 2003 or 4. I think I saw some reference to it in the media. But I think it had exceeded its design life of 10 years by a year or two. So that was the first one, and successful, much to everyone's pleasure and relief, as you can imagine. But they're all, I believe they're still being made. Things like this, versions of it are still being made. I think they're all going to the States.
Yeah.